Introduction to the Vision of Columbus, a poem in 9 books by Joel Barlow, Part 2, 1787. 3 small vessels, scarcely sufficient in size to be employed in the coasting business, were appointed to traverse the vast Atlantic, and to encounter the storms and currents that might be expected in so lengthy a voyage, through distant and unknown seas. These vessels, as might be expected in the infancy of navigation, were ill-constructed, in a poor condition, and manned by seamen unaccustomed to distant voyages. But the tedious length of time which Columbus had spent in solicitation and suspense, and the prospect of being able soon to obtain the object of his wishes, induced him to overlook what he could not easily remedy, and led him to disregard those circumstances which would have intimidated any other mind. He accordingly equipped his small squadron with as much expedition as possible, manned with 90 men and victualled for 1 year. With these, on the 3rd of August 1492, amidst a vast crowd of anxious spectators, he set sail on an enterprise, which, if we consider the ill condition of his ships, the inexperience of his sailors, the length and uncertainty of his voyage, and the consequences that flowed from it, was the most daring and important that ever was undertaken. He touched at some of the Portuguese settlements in the Canary Isles, where, although he had had but a few days' run, he found his vessels needed refitting. He soon made the necessary repairs, and took his departure from the westernmost islands that had hitherto been discovered. Here he left the former track of navigation and steered his course due west. Not many days after he had been at sea, he began to experience a new scene of difficulty. The sailors now began to contemplate the dangers and uncertain issue of a voyage, the nature and length of which was left entirely open to conjecture. Besides the fickleness and timidity natural to men unaccustomed to the discipline of a seafaring life, several circumstances contributed to inspire an obstinate and mutinous disposition, which required the most consummate art as well as fortitude in the admiral to control. Having been 3 weeks at sea, and experienced the uniform course of the trade winds, which always blow in a western direction, they contended that, should they continue the same course for a longer period, the same winds would never permit them to return to Spain. The magnetic needle began to vary its direction. This being the first time that phenomenon was ever discovered, it was viewed by the sailors with astonishment, and considered as an indication that nature itself had changed her course, and that Providence was determined to punish their audacity, in venturing so far beyond the ordinary bounds of man. They declared that the commands of their sovereign had been fully obeyed, in their proceeding so many days in the same direction, and so far surpassing the attempts of all former navigators, in quest of new discoveries. Every talent, requisite for governing, soothing and tempering the passions of men, is conspicuous in the conduct of Columbus on this occasion. The dignity and affability of his manners, his surprising knowledge and experience in naval affairs, his unwearied and minute attention to the duties of his command gave him a complete ascendant over the minds of his men, and inspired that degree of confidence which would have maintained his authority in almost any possible circumstances. But here, from the nature of the undertaking, every man had leisure to feed his imagination with all the gloominess and uncertainty of the prospect. They found, every day, that the same steady gales carried them with great rapidity from their native country, and indeed from all countries of which they had any knowledge. Notwithstanding all the variety of management with which Columbus addressed himself to their passions, sometimes by soothing them with the prognostics of discovering land, sometimes by flattering their ambition and feasting their avarice with the glory and wealth they would acquire from discovering those rich countries beyond the Atlantic, and sometimes by threatening them with the displeasure of their sovereign, mold their timidity and disobedience to feat so great an object, their uneasiness still increased. From secret whisperings, it rose to open mutiny and dangerous conspiracy. At length they determined to rid themselves of the remonstrances of Columbus, by throwing him into the sea. The infection spread from ship to ship, and involved officers as well as common sailors. They finally lost all sense of subordination, and addressed their commander in an insolent manner, demanding to be conducted immediately back to Spain, or, they assured him, they would seek their own safety by taking away his life. Columbus, whose sagacity and penetration had discovered every symptom of the disorder, was prepared for this last stage of it, and was sufficiently apprised of the danger that awaited him. He found it vain to contend with passions he could no longer control. He therefore proposed that they should obey his orders for 3 days longer, and, should they not discover land in that time, he would then direct his course for Spain. They complied with his proposal, and, happily for mankind, in 3 days they discovered land. This was a small island, to which Columbus gave the name of San Salvador. Their first interview with the natives was a scene of amusement and compassion on the one part, and of astonishment and adoration on the other. The natives were entirely naked, simple and timorous, and they viewed the Spaniards as a superior order of beings, descended from the sun, which, in that island and in most parts of America, was worshipped as a deity. By this it was easy for Columbus to perceive the line of conduct proper to be observed towards that simple and inoffensive people. Had his companions and successors of the Spanish nation possessed the wisdom and humanity of the great discoverer, the benevolent mind would feel no sensations of regret in contemplating the extensive advantages arising to mankind from the discovery of America. In this voyage, Columbus discovered the islands of Cuba and Hispaniola, on the latter of which, he erected a small fort, and having left a garrison of 38 men, under the command of an officer by the name of Arada, he set sail for Spain. Returning across the Atlantic, he was overtaken by a violent storm, which lasted several days and increased to such a degree, as baffled all his naval skill and threatened immediate destruction. In this situation, when all were in a state of despair, and it was expected that every sea would swallow up the crazy vessel, he manifested a serenity and presence of mind, perhaps never equaled in cafes of like extremity. He wrote a short account of his voyage and of the discoveries he had made, wrapped it in an oiled cloth, enclosed it in a cake of wax, put it into an empty cask and threw it overboard, in hopes that some accident might preserve a deposit of so much importance to the world. The storm however abated, and he at length arrived in Spain, after having been driven by stress of weather into the port of Lisbon, where he had opportunity in an interview with the King of Portugal, to prove the truth of his system by arguments more convincing than those he had before advanced, in the character of an humble and unsuccessful suitor. He was received everywhere in Spain with royal honors, his family was ennobled, and his former stipulation respecting his offices and emoluments was ratified in the most solemn manner, by Ferdinand and Isabella, while all Europe resounded his praises and reciprocated their joy and congratulations on the discovery of a new world.